What is up, my Nakamas? It is your boy T-Mac here, and we are back for another video. This time we're going to be taking a tier list and seeing what I think are the best decks in the format. So as you can see here, guys, I have already gone and put some decks into some tiers just because there are a lot of leaders, and I don't want to have to sit here for 10 minutes or 20 minutes going through each and every leader and putting it in a tier. So I went ahead and did it preemptively. But before we get into it, if you guys like what I'm doing over here, make sure you guys give a like and a follow. It means a lot. Still trying to get to 100, and we are super close. Maybe we'll have a little bit of a giveaway if we do hit 100. Um, a spicy one at 150. But enough of the shameless thing. Let's get straight into it. All right. So the first one we have to talk about is the rest in piss category. Sakazuki is the only leader that is banned, so he gets his own special category. Stay losing, rip bozo, never come back, stay where you are. Um, the I'm cooking at locals tier, you can obviously see it's huge. Like any deck in that tier can win a locals hypothetically, but I don't think they are the most competitive. And if you are looking for the most competitive in the metagame, I think uh, none of those decks in that tier will do it for you. You might argue with me a little bit on some of them, but I think they are all good deck for locals and learning the game. But let's get into the meat of the matter. And the first deck we're going to start off with is Zoro. I think Zoro still is in that somewhere around here. I don't think it's tier 1 anymore. Zoro's not that busted anymore. I want to put Zoro down into tier 2 actually, because I think um, decks have gone so far past the point of where they can easily clear the bodies Zoro's putting on early, and just you're not getting as much pressure. Not saying that he can't do well, but it's not as good as it once was. Similar deck in that fashion is Red Green Trafalgar Law. I also think that is in the tier 2 slot right now. It definitely got a lot of help with the Cavendish um, in EBO1, but I still think it struggles a little bit dealing with just Rob Lucci is a hard counter. There's so many like cards that can easily remove the bodies that it's putting down, and it has its own problems with not having. It's funny to say not having the good consistency and seeing its pieces and stuff like that. But on any given day, if the deck can do what it needs to do, it can definitely take W's. Another deck that this deck, I believe it is in tier 1.5, is Dofi, just because Dofi is getting so much support now, especially with the new searchers and the Edward Weevils from EBO1. And we already saw that if you guys are seeing the leaks, the Dofi is getting even more support. So over the next coming set, it's going to be busted. But even right now, you can really get some disgusting board states, especially with the new Jinbei that is coming in OP07. If you guys want to see a deck profile on that, I should have one um, either out already or it should be out in days. Definitely going to be a powerhouse of a deck going into the next format. A deck that I think is going to be, I think we can put it in tier 2, and I think it's going to be at the top end of tier 2, is Whitebeard. I still think Whitebeard can do Whitebeard things. Actually, you know what? I'll put it at the bottom of tier 1.5. I still think Whitebeard is doing Whitebeard things. You know, I mean, drawing all these cards, doing all of it. But because blue is so prevalent in the meta, um, you still have Charlotte Pudding, which is just a house against it. But when Whitebeard decides to do its thing, it can just do its thing. Plus, it's getting support constantly. Even with a new starter deck, it is going to get support as well. So I think it's going to do pretty well into the OP07 metagame. I think it's a solid tier 1.5. Nami will just always be a good 1.5 deck. It's always solid. It's always going to steal some tops and stuff like that. Just overall good deck. Um, Purple Luffy, Purple Luffy struggles just the same as any other of these tier 2 decks. It can do its thing at the end of the day, but it just doesn't have that oomph to get over. I think this deck is definitely going to be good in the future, and it is still a very overall solid deck um, going into the metagame, especially against the next deck we're going to talk about. It does have a favorable matchup, but it has some very unfavorable. well. Anyways, probably going to be one of the this deck is probably going to be one of the better decks in the format. First one to go into tier 1 is going to be NL. I think NL is just overall super busted. You get so many good tools in OP07 with the Frankie that you can use on one life to draw a card, and getting to play a body. It gets the 10 cost ace. You still have access to Rygo and stuff like that. I think NL is definitely going to be one of those decks you're going to be seeing a lot of in this format. So get ready for the mirror, guys, because this deck will be there. A deck that I think is going to be definitely going to be a sleeper is going to be Perona. I'm going to put Perona in 1.5. I think Perona still has access to a lot of tools. I think it's going to be a solid deck. People are not going to know how to deal with this deck. I think it's going to be one of those sleeper decks. Me myself, I've played against the deck, and the deck has some very good lines. It has some really bad matchups, but I think it can still do well into the metagame. A deck that I really wish was better, Reiju. Reiju's gonna have to go into tier 2, unfortunately. Like, Reiju's still doing stuff that, like, you can, if you can high roll on Reiju, you are godsend. I mean, seeing all your pieces and stuff like that. But I think Reiju still suffers to a lot of these decks up in the top end of the bracket. And it has a lot of unfavorable matchups, because one of the big things is you want to have those sticky bodies and stuff like that. But if decks have so much access to removal, I don't think Rager can stand up. So it's definitely a deck that can compete, but it won't be up here. Um, the next deck, unfortunately I have to put down into the tier 2 bracket. I think it's going to be at the top end of tier 2 is going to be Yamato. I think Yamato execute game plan is always very solid, but because of the way the decks above it are going to be operating, I think Yamato actually falls short. The executing game plan won't work as well, especially against NL. And Dolphy is going to be just putting up a bunch of blockers, and it's going to be a hard time overall just to deal with the decks that are above it. So Yamato does suffer and will unfortunately have to go into the tier 2 slot. The next deck I want to talk about is Gecko Moria. Gecko Moria is definitely going to be up there. I think Gecko Moria is obviously above Perona. I think it's above Nami as well. I don't think it's going to be the best black deck, but I think it's definitely going to be a black deck you have to watch out for and you cannot sleep on. I think it still has access to the usual suspects of tools, but the fact that it did lose out on the Great Eruption, it does hurt the deck a lot. That draw power that was needed for the deck, you don't have access to that anymore. But you do have replacements though, so it still can be pretty good. Monkey D Dragon, I think this was one I actually missed out on the locals train. I think it's going to be a good locals deck. I don't think it's actually going to be, I don't want to put it in tier 2. I don't think it's going to be that competitive. I'm actually just going to put it closer to like here. That's where I think it's going to be. These aren't organized, but that's where I think it's going to situate. I don't think it's that good of a deck. Prove me wrong in the comments and stuff like that, but going to be a deck. Bring it to locals, have some fun. Anyways, the deck I want to talk definitely have to talk about, which will definitely be up there, is Jewelry Bonnie. That's gonna definitely be up. I think it's closer. It's almost touching the tier 1, but it still has a lot to be desired, because sometimes you can get those nasty bricks. But I think it's definitely going to be one of the better decks in the format going into it, because it has such a good matchup into the top decks. But it also has a good matchup into Dofi, and it has a good matchup into Whitebeard as well. So I think it's definitely going to be up there for sure. The next deck we're going to talk about is Boa Hancock. Boa Hancock, I think, is going to be somewhere around there. I think the deck is still pretty solid. It gets it's a newer deck, but it has a lot of good tools. The 6 cost Boa being able to stun anything, and just the good old 2Ks. And I think once people figure this deck out, I think it's definitely going to be closer to the top end of the bracket, maybe even sliding in. I think 1.5 is where it's going to sit, but I think once people figure out the deck and the lines and stuff like that, it's definitely going to be a competitor that you have to worry about. Um, so speaking of competitors that you have to worry about easily going into tier 1, I think Rob Lucci going into the next format is going to be huge. I've played this deck for a little bit now, and just the sheer access to the removal it can do, like things just get off the board quite easily. You're filling up your trash, being able to recur bodies and stuff like that out of your trash, and even if you're playing a more mean build in the air door package, you still can do some really nasty board states. And the fact that it has access to 9-cost Stussy as well, I think this deck is going to be one of the powerhouses of the format. You gotta learn how to play against this deck, guys, because it is very nasty when it comes to board removal. So definitely going to be one of the best in the format for sure. Vegapunk, now, a lot of people are going to be like, T-Mac, you are trolling. Vegapunk is a bad deck. It only has 2 life. But I think Vegapunk is actually going to be a contender. I think Vegapunk actually can go here comfortably. I think Vegapunk is very it's like the precursor to Kelgaro from OP08, if you guys have ever seen that deck in action. But if you haven't, I think just being able to heal one every turn and play out a body, a 4-cost body, a 5-cost body every turn is just huge. And especially, it has a very good matchup into probably the best deck in the format, bar none, in Red Purple Law. Oh, man, I have a video for you guys. You guys definitely have to see. But Vegapunk can definitely put in its own. I think its bad matchups are horrible, but its good matchups are super solid and very consistent. So don't sleep on Vegapunk, guys. That is my hope for the day. But I think Vegapunk is definitely going to be in the tier 1.5. So these two, Eustace, Captain Kid, and Crocodile, the reason why I'm going to put them at tier 2, and you guys might think this is a hot take, but just because they are both generically good, I think they're like the decks that are the gatekeepers of what a good deck is in tier 1 and tier 2. From tier 2 to cooking at locals, I think both of these decks are very solid just because they can play generic tools that are just overall good. So you can never count these decks out. I think out of the OP01, the starter deck leaders from way back when, these two are always going to be generically good. I think they never go below tier 2. I don't remember if last format I put them at locals, but I think these two decks are going to still be very, very solid going into the OP07 metagame. And speaking about very solid and probably the best deck in the format, bar none, goes up here, is going to be the red purple Trafalgar Law deck. We know this is the best deck in the format, guys. I don't even have to talk about this. If you guys have seen my red purple law video, you know how hype this deck up is right now. Like everybody's playing this deck. The deck is really solid. Like even in the OP08 metagame, it is taking over Japan. You guys have to learn how to play against this deck. And if you're piloting this deck and you bring this to a competitive environment, you are going to do pretty well. It only has a few bad matchups. Like I mentioned, one of the bad matchups or kind of matchups is Vegapunk, just because you're able to constantly pressure the red purple law player into like making like bad decisions, especially if they don't have the removal and stuff like that for your bodies. But like I said, easily every other matchup though, it's so difficult to go against this deck. So easily tier probably the best deck in the format for OP07, even going into OP08, just going to be overall very solid. Now, a deck that saw resurgence in Japan, and I'm just going to put it here because I'm a big fan of this deck, is going to be the red purple Luffy from the ST10. Just being able to go into like big bodies and stuff like that pretty early, like turns ahead, and using the 10 cost to basically take an extra turn, I think it's still pretty a solid game plan. Like I've seen many tops with this in the OP07 on Japan side, but I think it's actually going to do really well here as well. People do like this deck a lot too, and you always see it in regionals, at least 1 or 2 people jamming it. I definitely think it's tier 2. I don't think it's a locals deck. I think you definitely can bring it to an event and do pretty well if you are a very good pilot. And as long as you learn the lines and into the matchup, it does have a pretty bad matchup into red purple, I think. But I think if you can dodge that matchup, you still can do pretty okay. So that's where that goes. Uta, I'm definitely going to put in tier 1.5. I think Uta is somewhere around here. I think it's a very solid deck. Still, you get access to all your the ACOS kid, you get access to the Zoro and all of that good jazz, and you still have like the pressure that you can put on board. And in Japan, this did win a big event in this metagame, so I think Uta is still pretty solid. I don't think it's down here in the tier 2 bracket yet, but 1.5 is definitely where it should situate. Sabo is definitely. I missed a few bring these to locals. Sabo is definitely a bring to locals. Like it's a fun deck. Um, I think the same with Ace as well. Ace is also one of those decks you can bring to locals. Probably this whole set of the starter deck 13, the advanced deck with the three brothers. I think all the leaders are very solid in their own right. Definitely you can bring these to locals and do pretty well. Don't think they're there yet competitively. Once we get the promo Sabo, this may change a little bit, but I definitely think it will do well once we get those. But for right now, it's you're cooking at locals. And then the final deck out of that advanced deck is Black Yellow Luffy. I think Black Yellow Luffy is easily going to be one of the best decks in the format. It's just really deadly when you can loop constantly the Black Sabo from OP04 to being able to draw two trash to having access to Gecko Moria, having access to all the removal tools and the filtering and draw and just the constant pressure that you can do with this leader going up to like 9k 11k on swings is just really huge. I think this deck will be easily. I think it's over Rob Lucci just a bit. I don't know if it's over Enel, but I definitely think it should be situated around here somewhere. So guys, this is my tier list for the OP07 metagame. Um, I think this is pretty solid. Uh, like everything seems pretty okay here. Like I do have a little bit of a hot take with some of the characters. Like more people would probably put Vegapunk a little bit down, maybe in tier 2, but I do think it's a tier 1.5 and can beat any of the tier 2 decks on a given day. Probably except for Zoro is probably the exception to that, but that is left to be debated. Anyways, if you guys don't agree with my list, because these are my opinions at the end of the day, let me know in the comments what you guys think. Are you guys looking forward to any specific leader in this set? Let me know because I always love hearing your guys' thoughts and stuff like that. Um, Otherwise, make sure you don't play any leader in the Go play Lorcana tier, man. Those leaders are just garbage. Anyways, enough rambling from me. Thank you guys as always. Means a lot here. Trying to get to that 100 subs, so make sure you guys hit that subscribe button and let me know what you think of the content that is coming out. Anyways, my name is T-Mac once more. Take it easy, stay frosty, stay hydrated, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.